All right, hello. Hope you can hear me okay. This is Nick back for another episode of HEYS Reviews. If you didn't catch it, episode one I released 2 weeks ago. That was me talking about a book I just read called Musical Truth by DJ Mark Devlin. Awesome book, 450 pages of fascinating references, lots of threads to pull on, lots of avenues to explore. If you didn't catch that, worth going back and having a look. I'll put a link underneath. At the end of that video, I picked 3 more books from my collection and offered the audience which one they would like to see me read and review next. Ahmed and Jerry, your votes came in first, and you chose The Paperclip Conspiracy by Tom Bauer. So I've been reading this for the last 2 weeks. I made a short video trying to review this last Sunday. That got rudely interrupted by my neighbor next door, who was vibrating the building with his bass subwoofer and music, and I just couldn't record anything. So I gave up, which I shouldn't have given up. I should have persisted, but never mind, that's another story. And I hadn't actually finished reading the book anyway, so I got some time to actually polish off the remaining chapters here, and I'm glad I did. I've got the whole picture now, at least the whole picture as Tom lays out in this book. And so I'm back. I'm going to talk about what I read, what I learned, put this book on your radar in case it's something you might want to pick up and read and learn about yourself at some point. So please hang around for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, and I'll share my thoughts with you, and it'll be a damn good time. Basically, we've got the story sort of picks up at the very end of, pretty much at the very end of World War II. The Allies are victorious. Actually, no, it doesn't pick up at the very end. There's this sort of we're looking at the back end of the war, and what's happening is the Allies are pretty concerned that they aren't going to win this war. The Germans have been um, working with scientists and engineers to develop their technology and to really improve and make advances in the fields of like aeroplanes and rocketry. And they've been doing that since the First World War. Whereas the Allies, particularly the English, here we were just sitting back and resting on our laurels, feeling good, feeling on top of the world. We beat them. We don't really need to do much, and there wasn't as much cooperation and investment and focus on research and development of technology. In particular, the English Army and Admiralty and Air Force, they weren't cooperating with each other, and they didn't want to work with scientists and engineers, and they thought of engineers as nothing better than salesmen, which is what a quote in here at some point, which I thought was pretty fascinating to think of an engineer as a salesman. But there was this pride and this arrogance, certainly on the part of the English, and this pride and arrogance got in the way of them recognizing and accepting that they needed to compete with Germany in this race to develop better machines, basically. So this is kind of ongoing at the beginning, and that's my computer fan coming on there, which I can't do anything about at the moment. I apologize if you can hear that. It's not a lawnmower; it's a computer fan of a very old laptop, which I have to replace one day. Um, so the beginning of the book, the first few chapters, are kind of showing how slow the English were to admit that how far behind they were in terms of tank development and plane development, and so you get a lot of these stories detailing this slowness and this arrogance and this refusal, really, to accept how far behind we were technologically in terms of our weapons. And so there's a good story, particularly which I'll flick to now and I'll read for you, which really sums this up. And it's a kind of exercise. They're sort of trying to demonstrate that this is 1936, and they're trying to demonstrate that we're good. We don't need to. We're prepared, and we don't need to invest or develop or train or research anymore. So it's in 1936, and Lord Chatfield, he's the minister responsible for defense coordination. He writes to Churchill that he is confident of the British merchant fleet's invulnerability. And so, in the same year, the commander-in-chief of the Mediterranean Fleet complained that the Navy had no defense against the new German dive bombers. To resolve the dispute, a major exercise was held the following year, watched by an impressive collection of senior naval staff. A droning Queen Bee target flew a predictable course directly above the awesome guns of the home fleet. To the considerable discomfort of the onlookers, it serenely circled the Armada for 2.5 hours, while the fleet unsuccessfully tried to shoot it down. After the fiasco, Chatfield admitted with characteristic British understatement, "Our present system is very imperfect." So they failed to shoot this droning, predictably moving target down for 2.5 hours. That must have been an agonizing, painful time. And their conclusion is that it's an imperfect system. So this just shows the attitude. We were very slow to admit and accept that we needed to work harder, work with scientists, and put some money and focus into the development of our weaponry and vehicles. So this kind of continues, and then it's not until 1940, by the end of 1940, where the comparative ineffectiveness of British anti-aircraft units had become a serious cause for anxiety. And this is comparative to the Germans and what they can do. And then we see the first cracks in the old prejudices against scientists, scientific intelligence, and the truth about German scientific achievements appears. So that's 1936 to 1940. This whole thing's going on, and you have some characters who are telling the higher ups in these organizations, in the Admiralty and the Army, that these Germans they got a lot of stuff going on here that we need to learn, because we're going to get left behind. And it just gets ignored. It gets downplayed. You know, they don't want to seem. They just don't want to accept it because they're going to look bad, basically. And so 1940. It becomes impossible to ignore. And then you get Operation Biting, which is the war's first military scientific raid and a blueprint for future operations. So this is where they start to realize that, okay, we need to grab some of this technology. We need to learn about it, figure out how it works. We need to use it on our side. So this really becomes the sort of the motivation and the driving force behind what becomes the Paperclip conspiracy, or Operation Paperclip. And they begin trying to salvage tanks and salvage planes that get shot down from the battlefield. So then we start to read about these characters who are sent out to do just this. Good example of this is Captain Plowright, R.W. Plowright. So this is 1940 again, and he's an experienced engineer, and he had proved himself as a fearless soldier in Palestine. And so he volunteers to fly to the beleaguered Tobruk fortress to inspect abandoned Panzer wrecks. So the Panzer was a tank, and Plowright is interested in getting some of that tech, learning how it works, and bringing it back. So I'll just read his story. His dangerous flight was rewarded by the detection of a host of technical revelations, although he was unable to identify the secret of the all-important face-hardened armor and the capped shells. After transmitting his report by radio, Plowright's small plane took off towards the sea. Moments later, it was shot down. Only on his death did Middle East Command slowly begin to reconsider the need for technical intelligence. So up to this point, there's no technical intelligence. There's nobody focused on how do their machines work, what weaponry are they using, how can we learn about it and use it ourselves. And that's just staggering to me. I kind of assumed that was always part of warfare, but it just shows you how slow off the bat we were here in England. And then we read about another character, Captain David Evans, and he is Plowright's successor. And then there's a good story of him here, which is about his greatest achievement, which was the salvage of a Mark IV tank from the desert. And he goes to salvage this tank, and he's trying to bring it back, and he's getting attacked, and people are shooting at him, and he's pulling this wreck of a tank. And this is how desperate we were, really, and how far behind we were, that we were risking lives. I said we, I wasn't there, nothing to do with me, but I'm English. They were risking lives to drag wreckages out of war zones to study it and look at it, and just imagine that as a mission. So just before it was, so he pulls this tank in, and then he loads it up on a ship, ready to send back to Britain to be analyzed and hopefully, rebuilt, recreated, so we can upgrade our own weapons. And just before the ship that he's loaded this tank on was due to sail, the ship was bombed in port. Yet Evans heroically rescued his prize, which became the first German tank to reach England. Uh, so, so he's gone into the war zone, dragged this wrecked machine out of it, put it on a boat. The boat gets blown up. He goes onto the boat. He drags the tank out of there, puts it on another boat, sends it back to the UK. That's a pretty impressive effort for a piece of scrap metal. But it just goes to show you the premium and the value that was placed on the German machinery and the German technology. This continues until 1942, and Tom Bauer writes, the Germans, aided by British ignorance and indecision, maintained their technical superiority into 1942. So that's, we've covered 36 to 42 now, 6 years of ignorance and indecision on the part of the Brits. In contrast, the British were in complete disarray and were also on the verge of forsaking their most deeply ingrained preconception, their superiority over the Americans and Germans. So we are really clinging on to this sense of superiority, to this sense of we're better, faster, stronger, harder, indefeatable, and it takes a lot to force the Brits to give it up. But the belated awakening becomes the source of Britain's eventual plan to plunder the enemy's store of technical and scientific knowledge. Well, so that's basically what this book is about, and that's kind of the context. It's this what happens next, as I'll explain shortly, is that there becomes this recognition. It's hard. A lot of people are trying to point this out. A lot of people are getting ignored, but they eventually accept. Right, we need to get some of this tech. The Germans are good at what they do. We're losing to them. Things are not looking good. We've had to get America involved, which is a whole other story that I have a few books about. I might talk about one day. But this is what the rest of the book deals with. This kind of frantic, sort of backstabby rush to get hold of what the Germans know and what they can do. And that's what happens next. And I say that's what happens next, but as I'm looking at my notes and the highlights that I've got here, it carries on, So there's a ministerial conspiracy to deliberately mislead Parliament about the powerless state of British armor. So the military are misleading the politicians and just being like, no, we're good, we got everything we need, it's all in control. And then on the 11th of September, 1943, Britain concedes victory to German industry and its engineers. And then, as I mentioned, they get America in, and it mentions here that Britain's reliance on America creates a competitor rather than an ally in the race to seize German secrets. So the Brits and the Americans start thinking like, oh, hang on a second, like they're looking ahead, they're looking past the war. They're thinking during peacetime, whoever has the tech that Germany has is going to be an advantage. And so they become competitors, even though they're allies in the war against Germany. They become competitors at this point when they recognize the value of the technical advancements that Germany's made. And then you get Churchill offering to make a deal, and he offers 50 obsolete in return for 50 obsolete American destroyers, Churchill offers some bases on British territory to Roosevelt. And he also offered the American Navy the secrets of ASDIC. I meant to look up what ASDIC is and what the secrets of ASDIC are. I forgot, but it sounds kind of Tolkien-esque almost, the secrets of ASDIC. But right below that, we have a great sentence. Roosevelt approved Churchill's package. So, they're getting on well at this point, but also there's a bit of a competition and they're having to make deals. And then the arrogance continues. Despite the sinking in 1942 of 1,664 Allied ships, totaling nearly 8 million tons at a cost of only 82 U-boats, traditional seafarers were slow to grasp that technical innovation had swept aside many of the Navy's historical preconceptions. So we lost 1,664 ships to 82 U-boats, and they're still not getting it. Just unbelievable, truly. So at this point, I wanted to mention that we get a little cameo from Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming rocks up, and he puts together this group um, who are, let me see, it's called the 30 Assault Unit. This is the brainchild of Commander Ian Fleming. And Ian Fleming, if you don't know, he was the author of the James Bond novels, very much involved in spycraft and espionage and this kind of thing, and propaganda, obviously, because what else? What other category would James Bond fall into? 30 Assault Unit, a naval team which was the brainchild of Ian Fleming. And then these are, they're named the Red Indians, and they're basically, their job is to go and recover German machinery. And then it says after, so, and he's arguing to put this team together, and they're still resisting the need to get this machinery to learn its secrets. But after overcoming considerable Whitehall opposition, Fleming's enthusiasm for a British elite technical intelligence group was rewarded by the dispatch of the first 30 AU team to join Operation Torch. What happens? Well, behaving like armed and expert looters, the Red Indians plunged into unsavory controversy amid reports of fights, drunkenness, and thefts. And then it says, even Fleming, so later on, even Fleming, he gets impatient with his Red Indians, and he renames them the 30 Indecent Assault Unit. So they're struggling. You know, they're kind of, they don't have the ability to get these secrets and these machines and this knowledge and to bring it back and to study it and look at it. So they're having to kind of invent that process on the fly. It reminds me a little bit of you know, other stories of different armies in history. They sort of, they invade and they they absorb the tech and the knowledge and the abilities of the people that they're conquering and invading. But here, because it's such cutting edge stuff, they don't. They, even when they manage to pull back a tank or a plane and look at it, they can't figure out what it is the Germans have done to build it. They can't reverse engineer the technology, and this must have been incredibly frustrating. Then we get a mention of Villa Rothschild, which is being used as a principal German naval headquarters. I thought that was pretty interesting. Another thread that I wanted to follow up, but never did. And at this point, we start to get Bauer starts to talk more about the industries and the industrial leaders, and how the Allies begin looking at the scientists, and they're starting to realize that if they can sort of if they can get the people who made these inventions, then they don't need to reverse engineer from a wreckage or a smashed up tank or a plane or something. You know, they can just get the people who built it and designed it and say, you know, come over here and do that again for us. So the focus shifts, and they start thinking about how they can get these scientists and engineers to work for them. So the war is over, and the Allies then begin kind of divvying up Germany and the lands and the places that Germany invaded and took over and was controlling. And then this is when this chapter, in the chapter called The Hunt, this is when the Allies, the French, the Russians, the Americans, and the British are all trying to hunt down German scientists and engineers and basically entice them to our side to come and work for the Allies. And it's this is where the book gets really interesting, because they're suddenly facing this moral problem of, do we want to hire people that designed weapons and techniques to murder our people? Not only did they design those things that killed so many of our people, they used slave labor to build the factories and wind tunnels and things where they tested, and they also tested did experiments on humans to develop these methods. You know, so very morally dubious and gray area to be talking about. And then, of course, you've got people on different sides of this argument. But a good quote from The Hunt, um, which is the sort of the angle that many, particularly in the military, in the British military, American military, they're thinking that they say, in common with many other allied scientific experts, there's an uncompromising demand. The Germans should be treated as fellow scientists, not as Nazis. They should be well paid and allowed to travel with their families, and critics who argued that the Germans were enemies should be told that pride and face saving have no place in national insurance. This becomes a common theme, and I actually wrote in the margin a few times that old chestnut, because we keep seeing this thing about national safety and national security and national insurance and the things we have to do to keep you safe. You know, and we really need to hire and give lucrative contracts to these Nazi scientists who experiment on people and design murderous weapons for your safety, which is a very interesting line of reasoning and logic. Not one I'm completely sold on, but it was interesting to see how it played out. Good story here as well about IG Farben, which gets mentioned a few times here. But so this is when the intelligence teams are going into Germany and they're trying to find and recruit these scientists. By far the earliest and most staggering discovery of the first intelligence teams to arrive in Germany was that scientists at IG Farben, the giant chemical manufacturer, had secretly developed a new strain of lethal nerve gas. The discovery of this invincible weapon, which had been loaded onto a V2, could have destroyed London with impunity, was not made public until years after the war, because American and British investigators were concluding a series of secret deals with the IG Farben scientists. So you start to get this kind of intrigue around and the secrecy around what the people we're trying to do deals with have done, and the military become very, let's say, sparing with the truth. They don't want a public outcry. They don't want to upset the politicians. They don't want to upset the public. And so they really have to put a lot of effort into downplaying these German scientists and engineers' involvement with the Nazi party, the Nazi regime, and the unfolding of all the horrific things that happened in World War II. So there's a few different characters who come up, like Otto Ambros, a brilliant chemist, and he was a senior director of IG Farben. And you've got different characters, kind of their records being expunged. You have this whole question around how do we get visas to get these German scientists out of their countries, and then what you see unfolding is that the scientists and the engineers, they realize that they are kind of being sought after, and they start making demands and they start shopping around. You know, they start going to the French and the Russians and the British and the Americans, and they're seeing what they have to offer, and they're kind of, you know, how much are you going to pay us? Is that income going to be tax free? Can I bring my family? How long's the contract? Where are you going to put us up to live? And in pretty much every single one of these instances, the Brits, we offered the worst deals and the worst contracts. So we didn't manage to lure many of these people over, which I don't know is a kind of funny thing. I sort of feel proud about that. But to just say a little bit about Ambrose, who I just mentioned, he starts to he's being interrogated and he's answering questions, and he's with another chap called Himmler, masterminded the construction of IG Farben's factory in Auschwitz, where tens of thousands of concentration camp inmates were worked by IG to death. But Tar, who's looking to entice him and get him over here, but Tar was not interested in Ambrose's genocidal career. He was after his scientific expertise. So the book covers a lot of these anecdotes about the cover-up of German scientists' involvement with torture and human experimentation and slave labor. and particularly the military and especially the American Air Force is really keen to gloss over this history. And I say history like it was a long time ago. I mean, it's within living memory of everyone involved. It's and they're just sort of we don't need to, it's science. It's for science. We all know how important science is these days, and so this kind of there's a lot of detail about these trials and this back and forth and how the different allies and different nations are trying to entice the German scientists. But I just got a note in the margin here where I've written "still arrogant in 1945." So this is a note that says, so it's 1945. The British illusions of superiority were such that French successes were considered negligible compared with the British operation. By autumn 1945, over 250 German civilian scientists and engineers had been flown to Britain for interrogation. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, very few of them stayed. Many of them went back to Europe, onto Russia, or onto America, or to South America, where a lot of Nazis also ran away to hide. And a great, this is a little anecdote here about Rudiger Kozin. He's a jet designer, and he's invited over to England to be interrogated so they can discover his secrets. And he says he was one among many who was invited to come to London for 14 days. Initially reluctant, he agreed because I wanted to see the effects of our bombing. So this sums up kind of the level of cooperation on the part of the German scientists. They realize that they have the upper hand, that their knowledge is valuable, but they don't want to give it away for free, and they start to stick together. And they start to play the game, and they start to agree to blame all the atrocities on dead Nazis, dead scientists, to try, and then they sell their own involvement in the Nazi Party and the atrocities as, well, I had to do it. I was just following orders. And we all know that famous phrase and the outcome of the Nuremberg trials, judging and deeming that as not an acceptable defense. There's another part here. Kozin, when he's being interrogated, even he says of the Brits, they all thought that they knew more than us. So even in 1945, the Brits are still arrogant. I guess they won the war, so that probably brought the arrogance back up. It also, we learn about the amount of money they're offered. So here, it was suggested the Germans should be given contracts equivalent to those offered to British scientists with a salary of £800 a year. Back then, in today's money, £800 a year is approximately £38,000 a year in 2022's money. Which, if you're listening to this and you have a salary less than that, should be a Nazi scientist, you'll make more money. So then you get this distinction between reparations and plunder. And plunder is kind of considered to be, you can take anything that Germany doesn't need to during peacetime, and the plunder can just be sort of picked up and taken and ad hoc. The reparations have to be sort of negotiated and agreed by the victors, by the allies, and so what ends up happening is there's a lot of back and forth, and they're trying to agree on the amounts based on the losses that they've suffered. And then there's a part here. This is in the Bureaucrats and Buccaneers chapter. At the cabinet meeting on the same day, the Chancellor of the Exchequer solemnly announced that British costs in Germany had risen to over £100 million. Yet Britain, whose economic plight was worsening, had still not received any reparations, and the Control Commission staff had increased to 22,700. So this Control Commission, they are sort of in charge of divvying up the reparations and deciding what happens in Germany and other areas, and they really they don't do things in Britain's favor. It's very strange what happens actually, and you get a lot of detail about how they're sort of they're not allowing Britain to get the spoils and to get the machinery and the scientists, and then also civil servants are favoring German industry and German businesses, and and the Brits end up subsidizing them, which was pretty frustrating. But at that time, this was aggravating the British industrialists. Said it was the knowledge that in practice they are being made to subsidize their German competitors. That's the quote I was looking for. So it's a very strange situation, but basically the war is over, and then these German scientists and industrialists, they kind of get given back their businesses and to run them, or they get brought into America and other places and given jobs and contracts and work there. So a lot of these guys ended up kind of in a better off situation than they were during or before the war. Not only do these scientists get nice jobs and good contracts and whatnot, but they also get people in the American military in particular, like lobbying on their behalf and drawing all this attention to how sad they are because their families are back in Europe, or the conditions they're working in are critically affecting the scientists' work. And there's even a bit here where they're feeling depressed and suicidal because they're just the conditions and where they are so bad that these people are getting suicidal, which is pretty interesting that so much care and concern was given to people who were provably involved in some really atrocious war crimes. Operation Paperclip is then born. It actually, because it was Operation Overcast, it becomes Paperclip, and it's called that because they would slide a normal paperclip onto the file of persons of interest and people they wanted to recruit. But then what happens is a lot of people are playing up their knowledge and downplaying their involvement in Nazism during the war. But the military are so hell-bent on recruiting these people, these scientists and engineers, that they classify the whole operation, and they decide we can't. Basically, they don't even tell the president about it. They mislead and keep it a secret from the president. They don't want it getting out to the public. And at one point, they do start releasing some propaganda, and they have a kind of they do a portrait of a paperclip scientist, and he's a kindly old man, and he likes, and he says he likes cycling or something. It talks about his hobbies and how he didn't want to be involved, and he was only a member of the Nazi Party because he had to be, because if he wasn't, something bad would have happened to him. So this is it. The benign-looking German was described as a collector of rare butterflies, a painter, and an enthusiastic cyclist. The image of an educated and innocuous German was perfectly captured. So there's this whole propaganda piece around it, trying to downplay who they're actually hiring. And there's a name worth mentioning, a gentleman called Samuel Klaus, and he really went up against Paperclip. He even got, they think that he got an article published in the New York Tribune, kind of blowing the whistle, basically, Sam Klaus. And he did a lot of good work at preventing the success of Paperclip and delaying it by requiring certain stringent checks be done on everyone they're bringing into the country. But he couldn't hold out for too long, and he eventually gets kicked off kicked out of the group that he's working in and moved somewhere else. So to just say a little bit more about Klaus, he aggressively admits that he would ensure less than a dozen scientists are ever permitted to enter the US, and he totally succeeds. He impedes, it says, no fewer than 16 of the 17 policy papers regulating, trying to bring these scientists in. And the one that he didn't impede was about declassifying paperclips. So he's a whistleblower. He wants transparency and openness, and he's trying to bring this to the public's awareness. And the military are not so happy with his efforts, but he did really well. I think it's a name worth mentioning, and I want to read more about this guy. Name worth mentioning, one of the most notorious people to be hired through Operation Paperclip is Werner von Braun. It says here, the security report on the rocket expert showed that he had been a member of many Nazi organizations. I didn't even know I thought there was just one, the Nazis, but apparently there's multiple Nazi organizations, including the SS. He had been in which he'd been promoted 3 times since 1940. He was too important for his past to interfere with his future status. Indeed, while other German scientists longed for reunions with their family, at that very moment, von Braun was getting married to his 18-year-old second cousin at Landshut, having sailed to Europe at the army's expense. Since von Braun would undoubtedly remain in the US indefinitely, it was necessary to make a detailed report including any extenuating circumstances to show that these were honorary appointments in the Nazi organization, and that von Braun was no more than a nominal party member, despite the multiple promotions. And this happens a lot. This extenuating circumstances. People keep getting asked to find these extenuating circumstances to justify why the scientists they want to hire were members of these organizations and parties. And then I mentioned earlier the president wasn't even on it. There's a section here where the chief of military intelligence is admitted to the office of General Eisenhower, the chief of staff, and they're having a personal inquiry into the army's embarrassment. So there's some whispers and murmurings and rumors, especially off the back of Samuel Klaus's article. But the person who knows the most about it is not invited to attend. Instead, they invite this other guy who doesn't really know what's going on. He's not really in the know, and they get him to give the report. And the end result is that within 20 minutes, the briefing was completed. Eisenhower had been convinced that Paperclip was a legal and valuable operation, and there was apparently no discussion about the presence of notorious Nazis in America. Fantastic. So some statistics here about the aeronautic experts. There had been approximately 2,500 of these experts in Germany in 1945. Of these, 25% ended up working in Russia, 12% ended up in America, 8% ended up in France, and only 1% ended up in Britain. So that's another little statistic and tidbit that makes me feel very proud and warm and fuzzy to be British. And so what kind of happens at the end is that the Cold War kicks off, and then it becomes the military is arguing that, well, we're going up against Russia now. Russia's 25% of these, is recruiting these German scientists and engineers like mad. We've got to get them to prevent them getting into Russia's hands. And they start using the line that if you don't want us to employ these notorious Nazi scientists, then you must be a communist sympathizer. And so this is another angle they use to justify these visas and these lucrative contracts and these privileges that are given to people who had been involved in some pretty horrific acts. And that kind of brings us to the end of the book. These people, they get hired, they get brought into the country, and they remain there, for a very long time. And some are still living today, he mentions, or at least in 1987 when he wrote the book. And the very last chapter deals with money and the gold and the loot that Germany amassed on its World War II campaign, and how a lot of that loot was funneled through neutral countries such as Portugal and Spain and Switzerland, and then sort of reclaimed after the war, with these countries just being like, well, we're neutral, we don't get involved, while they're giving the gold back to the German industrialists and the Nazi scientists. But yeah, so that's The Paperclip Conspiracy by Tom Bauer. It was a fascinating book. I'm not a big reader of history, and it's one of the first books I've ever read, I think, that deals with military history. So it's a lot of names, a lot of details about vehicles and weapons and things. So I don't really have a head for that, but the stories and the anecdotes that I found in here, I think, are very worthwhile. And it's just a very eye-opening account of who's really pulling the strings and why they're pulling the strings. And you find that the military are really at least in this account, they're really off on their own, doing their own thing. They're not, they don't seem to be beholden to anyone. They don't have to explain themselves. Nobody's getting them to justify what they're doing. They're just off doing it, and that was pretty interesting. And I wonder how many more of how much more collusion between military and so-called bad guys or enemies there is going on. I'm sure I've got some other books on my shelves that deal with this kind of topic, which I'm looking forward to reading and reviewing for you in future episodes. All right, that was my book review of Tom Bauer's Paperclip Conspiracy. It's getting dark here now, as you can see. I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you for sticking with me this long. If you have, if you haven't, then you're not there to hear me say these words, so I don't even know why I'm talking to you. I hope you're doing something awesome wherever you are and whatever you're doing. Yeah, so for my next video, I've been looking through my books and trying to figure out, okay, what would be a good options or good follow-up to this. And I don't have them with me because I'm not at home at the minute, but I do have 3 books, and I'm going to splice in pictures of them, I think, hopefully, onto this video at the end. But the first book I was considering is called IBM and the Holocaust, and this is by Edwin Black. And this book is basically about the strategic alliance between Nazi Germany and America's most powerful corporation. Something I didn't know about until about a year and a half ago, that IBM were active and involved in the Holocaust. And that's fascinating to me because IBM is still going strong, still doing business, still involved in, still a household name. So that's a book I'm very interested in reading and learning about. The other one I was thinking about is Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. So this is by Anthony Sutton, who's a very well-respected researcher and historian. And this is about how the links between Wall Street and big finance and kind of monopoly financiers and their involvement in how Hitler got as far as he did. I haven't read that before. Also, should be a very interesting read. And then the third book I thought I would offer is The Origins of the Second World War by A.J.P. Taylor. I picked this book up at a secondhand bookshop. I did a quick Wikipedia search on the author, and it said that whatever he'd written about was controversial, so I bought it. I always think controversial subjects are the best ones to learn about, and so I have no idea what his thesis is in that, but I thought it would be another good one to offer. So to recap those 3, that's IBM and the Holocaust, that's Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and it's also The Origins of the Second World War by A.J.P. Taylor. If you have a preference on which one of those you'd like me to read and review next, please leave a comment, send me a message, and I will see you when I've got that done. Thank you very much. Talk to you all again soon.